Hello students, through this video I am going to explain you the poem A Prayer for My Daughter written by William Butler Yeats. Yeats was born in 1865 and lived till 1939. He was an illustrious Irish poet, writer and playwright. He was a staunch Irish nationalist who continued to espouse this cause all his life. At the prime of his youth, that is, at the age of 24, he met the woman Maud. She too was an ardent votary of the Irish cause. Yeats was enamored of her for her dedication, energy, and of course her beauty. Yeats' mind was swept with love for Maud, but she remained aloof. Yeats proposed to her as many as 4 times, but she declined to reciprocate. She chose to marry Major John MacBride. It left Yeats distraught and dejected. Later, Yeats married Georgie Hydalis. She bore him 2 children, Annie and Michael. The memory of Maud remained etched in Yeats' mind, making her the muse for many of his great literary works later. This poem was written by Yeats when Annie was a tender infant. It expresses his love and concern for Annie. The First World War had just drawn to close, leaving a trail of death and destruction on Europe. Inside Ireland, there was a surge of Irish nationalism and Catholicism. Life was hard in Ireland then. Want, unrest, upheaval, and discontent made life hard for the ordinary citizens. There was frustration, angst, and fear. Yeats did not escape this air of despondency. In this backdrop, he penned this poem for the little baby whom he loved so much. A Prayer for My Daughter is an intensely personal poem written in 1919, a few weeks after Yeats' daughter Annie was born. This poem speaks about the anxiety felt for the well-being of his daughter, as also about the anxiety shared by all fathers all over the world torn by war and greed. He thinks how his daughter will face the coarse and vulgar world. He imagines the war drums which forecast the struggle for survival. He thinks that the cruelty of man is more dangerous than the murderous innocence of the sea. He believes that she can protect herself by cultivating virtues of nobility and courtesy. He prays that his daughter should have beauty but not vanity. He wants his daughter to have happy and innocent thoughts in her mind. She should scatter her happiness all around. Her soul should flourish like a flourishing tree. He wants his daughter to be free from hatred and to shun strong or stubborn opinion on any subject, political or otherwise. He wants innocence to replace hatred. It will give inner peace to his daughter. He wishes his daughter to get married in a good aristocratic family and lead a happy life. Now, let us look at the lines of the poetry. The first stanza. Once more the storm is howling, and half hid under this cradle hood and coverlid. My child sleeps on, there is no obstacle but Grigory's wood and one bare hill, whereby the haystack and roof-levelling wind bred on the Atlantic can be stayed. And for an hour I have walked and prayed, because of the great gloom that is in my mind. The poet says in these lines that his little innocent infant, Annie, is fast asleep in her cradle. The hood of the cradle half covers the cradle. A furious storm coming from the Atlantic Ocean batters everything outside the house. The bare hill and the woods bear the brunt of the storm. The haystack and the roof can barely stand the thrust of the raging winds. Annie, oblivious of the fury of nature outside, sleeps, but her father is filled with worries about her safety and her rearing in the hard times that ahead. In reality, Yeats was strolling when these disturbing thoughts grip his mind. He imagines the storm as a symbol of the unraveling difficult times. He is deeply apprehensive about Annie's upbringing. The cradle and its hood that partly cover it are the symbols of the limited security Yeats, as a father, can provide to Annie. Now the second stanza. I have walked and prayed for this young child an hour, and heard the sea wind scream upon the tower, and under the arches of the bridge, and scream in the elms above the flooded stream. Imagining in excited reverie that the future years had come, dancing to a frenzied drum, out of the murderous innocence of the sea. The poet's sense of gloom deepens as he continues his walk for about an hour. The weather, as conjured by his nervous mind, is violent and destructive. The nature appears to wreak its vengeance on man. A confluence of devastating forces is imagined as the flood stream that is going to wash away everything on its way. Even the strong elms trees are tossed around by the torment unleashed by the winds. The future, in its most hideous form, confronts the author. A little later, the poet sees some light, some respite from the traumatic hallucinations. He thinks of the days to come when Annie would grow up to a world of hope and possibilities by saying that the future years had come, dancing to a frenzied drum. The author invokes optimism and a permanent respite from the doom and gloom of the prevailing difficult days. Now, the third stanza. May she be granted beauty and yet not, beauty to make a stranger's eye distraught, or hers before a looking glass for such, being made beautiful overmuch. Consider beauty a sufficient end. Lose natural kindness and maybe the heart revealing intimacy that chooses right and never find a friend. Yeats hopes that Annie would grow up to a beautiful damsel, but he does not like her to be a paragon of beauty. In Yeats' view, extreme beauty could be harmful and ruinous for a woman. It might invite jealousy and sarcasm from others. It might make those people distraught who aspire for her hands but can't get it. The spurned lover may even become vengeful towards her. Beauty that inspires wild passions in others is fraught. Beauty often misleads the beholder by giving a false sense that she is gifted extraordinary person who has no need of any other desirable qualities. Such vainglorious feeling is unhelpful to a woman. The resulting arrogance may rob her of kindness. Now the fourth stanza. Helen being chosen found life flat and dull and later had much trouble from a fool, while that great queen that rose out of the spray, being fatherless, could have her way. Yet chose a bandy-legged smith for man. It's certain that fine women eat a crazy salad with their meat, whereby the horn of plenty is undone. In this stanza, Yeats recounts the miserable fate that befell the Helen of Troy and Venus. Both were immensely beautiful, but carried huge load of curse and suffering. They were condemned to marry a fool and a bandy-legged smith. Now the fifth stanza. In courtesy, I would have her chiefly learned. Hearts are not had as a gift, but hearts are earned by those that are not entirely beautiful, yet many that have played the fool. For beauty is very self has charm made wise. And many a poor man that has roved, loved and thought himself beloved, from a glad kindness cannot take his eyes. The next stanza deals with what Yeats determines are very important, womanly qualities such as courtesy or kindness and civility. He asserts that men adore women who exude charm, kindness and gentle manners. Being exquisitely beautiful is not necessarily a very lovely woman's prerequisite. In courtesy, I would have her chiefly learned. Hearts are not had as a gift, but hearts are earned by those that are not entirely beautiful. Now, the sixth stanza. May she become a flourishing hidden tree, that all her thoughts may like the linnet be, and have no business but dispensing round their magnanimities of sound, nor but in meritment begin a chase, nor but in meritment a quarrel. Oh, may she live like some green laurel, rooted in one dear perpetual place. Yeats hopes that his daughter grows up to embody wisdom, joy and reticence. Yeats wants her to live in a protected place, away from gloom, danger and destruction. He certainly does not want her to be exposed to the turmoil and frenzy he had conjured up at the beginning of the poem. He uses the idea and image of a deep-rooted and stable sprawling tree to express the safety and security needed for his daughter. Yeats writes, "Oh, may she live like some green laurel, rooted in one dear perpetual place." Now the seventh stanza. My mind, because the minds that I have loved, the sort of beauty that I have approved, prosper but little, has dried up of late, yet knows that to be choked with hate may well be of all evil chances chief. If there is no hatred in a mind, assault and battery of the wind can never tear the linnet from the leaf. In this stanza, Yeats introspects and truly concludes that his mind is dried up of late, which is weathering away. However, quite steadfastly, he keeps the temptation of hate away. He knows that a mind afflicted by hate is doomed because the smoldering cinders of hatred consume the noble creativity of mind. In the line to be choked with hate may well be of all evil chances chief. He asserts this with conviction. Now, the eighth stanza. An intellectual hatred is the worst, so let her think opinions are accursed. Have I not seen the loveliest women born out of the mouth of plenty's horn? Because their opinionated mind barter that horn and every good, by quiet natures understood, for an old bellows full of angry wind. In this stanza, Yeats unravels his feelings relating to the woman who spurned his love 4 times, Maud Gonne. The wound and the rancour Maud inflicted on his mind comes to the fore in this stanza. Maud, a very ravishing woman as per Yeats, not only rejected his courtship but went on to marry Macbride. Yeats could not reconcile to this all his life. Maud, according to Yeats, was a highly gifted woman who was showered with gifts from plenty's horn. Sadly, her opinionated mind made her to squander all those precious things on Major Macbride. Maud's fiercely held convictions and fiery idealism made her too opinionated. This imparted a negative aura to her personality. Hence, Yeats felt his daughter must not be opinionated. Now the ninth stanza. Considering that all hatred driven hence, the soul recovers radical innocence and learns at last that it is self-delighting, self-appeasing, self-affrighting, and that its own sweet will is heaven's will. She can, though every face should scowl, and every windy quarter howl, or every bellows burst, be happy still. Yeats then fondly hopes that his daughter becomes as beautiful as Maud, but does not get the latter's haughtiness and arrogance. He wants his daughter to submit to heaven's will with a smiling face. Her soul must imbibe radical innocence or be rooted innocence. Such values would bring abundant happiness for her and all those who eschew hatred. Now the last stanza. And may her bridegroom bring her to a house where all's accustomed ceremonious for arrogance and hatred are the wares peddled in the thoroughfares. How but in custom and in ceremony are innocence and beauty born? Ceremonies a name for the rich horn, and custom for the spreading laurel tree. The poem ends with an imaginary climax. Yeats, as the loving father, imagines the marriage of his daughter. She goes to live in her husband's home as per the set norms of custom and ceremony. She enjoys the safety and security of her cozy home in sharp contrast to the crumbling house described at the outset of the poem. She does not have to face the violent storm. He closes his prayer by returning to the image of the horn and the tree as sources of custom. Such optimism might bring deliverance to the world. With this explanation, we have come to the end of the poem.